All right. How are you guys doing, man? I love that intro. Hopefully you guys enjoy the music just as much as I do. So I am late, obviously doing this stream. Life has been crazy in a good way. I'm actually not in my usual place. I'm currently in Denver, visiting a few of the pastors here, brothers in Christ. So it's been a blast, but it's also been keeping me very busy. What I'm about to show you in this live stream, in this video, and thank you guys for joining me, by the way, on sort of weird short notice. Like I told you guys 2, then 4, and now we're here at 6. So thank you for being here, guys. Appreciate you. Shalom to you. God bless you guys. Um, this took me all week, and this is a lifetime of research, and I'm barely scratching the surface. But what I put together for you today took me all week. It was so much work. I I put so many hours into it. So I really do hope that this blesses you. I really do hope that this is going to be something that's very eye-opening for you. And I just pray that Yeshua would open your eyes to your true Hebrew ancestry wherever you might fit into the picture, because we are all a part of this amazing story of the lost tribes of Israel. And even though we can't know for certain, maybe exactly which tribe we belong to, there's a blessing in understanding and discerning what tribes correspond to which words, which blessings, which prophecies in the scriptures. As you guys know, we've been talking about this. Go check out the other 2 live streams if you have not already. We've been talking about where the lost tribes have gone. This is important. You have to look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 2 through 4, where Moses tells us when we return to the Lord our God and obey his voice, then he's actually going to have compassion and bring us back and gather us. And even if we've gone to the farthest parts under heaven, from there, he's going to bring us. He is going to gather his people. And what basically all of Christianity, all of Christendom has failed to understand is that when the New Testament talks about gathering the quote unquote elect, when there's so many different things spoken of in the New Testament that have to do with prophecy of some sort of a gathering, a regathering. I'm going to gather you again, God says many times. Well, he's actually quoting Deuteronomy because the tribes have been scattered, as you guys know. I've been talking about this. And so when you look at Isaiah chapter 19, verse 1, and the passage is saying, behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud. That's exactly what we see in Matthew. Let's go take a look at it. I have it on screen, but I actually want to show you this time. I didn't do this last time. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. Matthew 24:30. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet. They will gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to another. And of course, because of Yeshua, because of Christ, we are able to be grafted into one kingdom, one nation, one royal priesthood, one holy nation, the fatness of the olive tree, Paul said in Romans chapter 11. We become grafted into all of these tribes, and understanding their identities, understanding the prophecies that correspond with their identities is the key to unlocking end times prophecy. So where did they go? On screen, I show you where the Northerners kind of went, but the Southerners went basically in the same directions too, just at different times. But you have in 722 Israelites getting dispersed all over the place, from Persia all the way in the east up to the Caucasus Mountains, all the way to the west. Whether it's Italy, the Iberian Peninsula, which Iberia is another variation of Hebrew Peninsula, Britain, Hibernia, Scotia, they went everywhere. And so what we're doing here, guys, is we're tracking down where they have gone. And this is why it's taken me so much labor to bring you the information tonight that I'm going to be bringing, because here's where we left off. We're going through the book of Joshua verse by verse, right? And when you look at it verse by verse, I'm going to show you some details of why that's so important. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I can give you some things that are going to revolutionize or radically change your understanding for the better of why it's just so important to pay attention to every word in the Bible, not just the verses that we like or that are popular. Otherwise, we're never going to uncover so many truths, right? So when we look at Simeon, this is where we left off, guys, Joshua 19, the second lot. So again, we've already divided up the land for a bunch of other tribes. They started casting lots for the remainder. So the second lot came out for Simeon, for the tribe of the children of Simeon, according to their families, and their inheritance was within the children of Judah. They had in their inheritance Be'er Sheba, or Molada, Hazar, Shual, Bala, Azem, El Toalad, Betluth, Hormah, Ziklag, Bet Markaboth, Hazar, Susa, Bet Lebaoth, and Sharuhen, 13 cities and their villages, Ain, Ramon, Ether, and Ashan, 4 cities and their villages, and all the villages that were all around these cities as far as Baalath, Be'er, Ramath, and of the south. This was the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Simeon according to their families. The inheritance of the children of Simeon was included in the share of the children of Judah, for the share of the children of Judah was too much for them. Therefore, the children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of that people. I don't know if you saw it on the map. That's exactly what we see here in the south. Simeon was here, but again, Simeon is an interesting tribe because when we go to, like, they're not southerners. They identify with the north. They ally themselves with Jeroboam instead of Rehoboam, Solomon's son. They go with Jeroboam to the north, and so they're actually northerners, even though they're geographically south, but they're eventually kind of scattered. And actually, what's interesting about Simeon is that, remember, there's 2 places. When we're talking about the tribes, where are they today? There's 2 places that we use because in Genesis chapter 49, Jacob literally says, my sons, gather together. This is going to be what's going to happen in the last days. Genesis chapter 49, the very first 2 verses tell us this. Then we look at Moses, Deuteronomy 33, verse 8. These are the 2 primary locations, not the only locations, but these are the primary locations where we get the details, the meat of where are these tribes right now. And again, what's interesting about Simeon, and he's not mentioned in Deuteronomy 33. Why? Because Simeon, and I talk about this in Bible Prophecy Secrets chapter 2, guys. Download it for free, link below. Simeon revolted under Moses' leadership, actually. And because Pinchas killed a Simeonite prince after he was sleeping around with a Moabite woman, there was a humongous fallout from the Simeonite tribe. A lot of them revolted under Moses. We have like historical evidence. I talked about this a little bit. So Moses didn't even bless them in chapter 33 of Deuteronomy. That's mind-blowing. Now, Genesis 49, we actually do get clarity of what the identity is. So I'm going to cover Simeon and Levi together. Is it cool if we do that? Because it doesn't make sense to do it separately because there's no distinction in the text that they're separate. And this is, guys, this is what I noticed with a lot of Lost Tribes commentators. They try to split Simeon and Levi, but the same narrative applies to both of them. So I'm not going to do that because we need to actually, in order to understand, you have to understand the symbols that apply to both. There's really no reason to say one symbol or the other symbol pertains to Simeon and Levi. They both basically have 2 main symbols, and then we'll talk about, yes, there is a symbol that is unique to Levi himself because of what Moses talks about in Deuteronomy 33, but generally speaking, the ephod is what pertains to Levi. We'll talk about this. So you guys can already see it on screen. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Okay, that's a sword, right? Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So whoever Simeon and Levi are, they're going to be scattered. They're never going to be a world empire. They're going to be dispersed among the other tribes, and that's exactly what we see. That's exactly what we see in the last days. Remember, this is a last days prophecy. It wasn't fulfilled like 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, right? It's a last days prophecy. And what Moses said of Levi in Deuteronomy 33:8, let your Thummim and your Urim be with your Holy One, whom you tested at Massah, and with whom you've contended at the waters of Meribah. And so the Thummim and Urim are 2 breastplate stones, is how they're commonly understood. Or the way I've read it is these are the stones used for making big decisions. I believe these were used for casting lots. So that's what Levi. So again, we get that breastplate, the casting of lots, the priesthood association right here. So that's what we're looking at, guys. We're looking at these particular uh, symbols. We're looking at the sword and the castle for Simeon and Levi. I'm gonna show you and explain to you why this is the case, right? If you're looking at this, you're probably like, what are you talking about? And then with Levi, it's so cool, guys. What I'm showing you on screen is so hard to find. Most people don't understand how to identify these symbols. So we get all of the intel from Genesis 34. There was an incident with Dinah. She's basically raped by Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite. And so after Jacob flees Laban's house, 21 years of service, working, really hard labor, not being rewarded for his labor properly, getting his wages changed. He goes to Shechem, buys a plot of land, and then this happens. And Simeon and Levi ruin the shalom of Jacob because Shechem, yes, he rapes Dinah. He grabs her by force. It's not good. But he was trying to make it right. He's like, hey, I'll do whatever you want. We're going to get circumcised and become Hebrews, basically, just like you guys. We're going to become one people. But Simeon and Levi, they spoke deceitfully, it says in Genesis 34:13. But of course, which sons do you guys think it was? The sons of Jacob. Well, Simeon and Levi spoke deceitfully. They made them get circumcised, made a false covenant with the inhabitants of Shechem, and then killed them all. And that's why their anger was ridiculous. The inhabitants of the land, Jacob was worried that they would conspire to kill them. It was horrible. Simeon and Levi put Jacob their father, in a horrible situation. And so this is where we get all the context for the symbols. They killed every male with the edge of the sword. Okay, that's the first thing we need to know from Genesis 34. They killed Hamor. This is Genesis 26. 34:26. They killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword. They took their sister Dinah, and then they came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took sheep, oxen. They plundered everything. So here's a secret of secrets. Are you ready for a secret? It's so difficult to understand this. It took me a very long time to understand it. What does it say? That Hamor and Shechem, these are the rulers, right? You get the king, Hamor, and Shechem, the prince, came to the gate. So this is a city with a gate. What else do we see? We see that there is a tower, a castle. Let me see. It's a palace. I know, like, I read different translations, but basically they went up to get Dinah, and they got her from Shechem and Hamor's castle. So it's a city with a gate, and we know that there's a king and a prince. So that's where we get the castle symbolism. That's where we get the castle, which I show you on screen here. Let me see here. I want to see. So there's gate. The word gate is mentioned 3 times in the narrative here, and then it says they killed Hamor and Shechem. They took Dinah from Shechem's house, and we can understand that to be the king's house, the king's palace. We can understand it to be the fortified part of the city, and that's where we get these symbols of Simeon and Levi, the castle and the sword. Or another way of looking at it is the castle represents the city of Shechem with the gate, which again is what I showed you here with the symbol of Levi, which we'll get to. But let's just talk about Simeon. So, and the sword, and Levi and the sword. So both of them have this joint blessing that's kind of a curse, right? It's kind of a curse. So this is a really cool fact. The Bedford flag is the oldest known flag in the United States. It dates to 1775, and it has a arm with a sword. But we see the sword everywhere, guys. We see it in Prague, the Czech Republic. We see it in Sweden, Ireland, the flag of Prussia. We see it in England, of course, Belgium, Spain. And we often see, and this is a key detail here, guys, key detail, the lion holding a sword. That's really important because remember, Simeon was in Judah's territory, first of all, but second of all, he was scattered as well. And so what you're going to find is you're going to find a rider with a sword. You're going to find a lion with the sword. You're going to see the sword mixed with other symbols of the Israelites because they were scattered. Simeon and Levi were scattered. and they were dispersed. So that's why you see the lion holding a sword a lot of times. It's a really cool, isn't this really fascinating though? But if let me tell you something though. Let's look at the castle. When it comes to the castle, there's no other place in the old world. Remember, Paul visited Spain. The Apostle Paul, he visited Spain. Spain was around, right? I know it's kind of silly for me to say that. Jonah, when he was going to Tarshish, he got on a boat to go to Joppa. He made his journey to go to Spain also, across the Mediterranean. And Joppa is modern day Tel Aviv. My point is, Spain has been around forever. That part of the Mediterranean right there in the Iberian Peninsula has been around forever. And there's one particular symbol that's so heavily associated with both Portugal and Spain, and that is the castle. So the coat of arms of Spain has the castle. The coat of arms of Portugal have the castle. But of course, before those two nations really took hold, the land was divided into Aragon, Castile, Galicia, not to be confused with Galatia in Asia Minor, Leon. You have all these different Middle Age kingdoms, but for almost 800 years, you have the kingdom of Castile. You see that on my screen right here. Let me zoom in. You literally have a Middle Age kingdom for almost 800 years that dominated the peninsula, and that is the castle. Clear symbolism that has to do with the city of Shechem and its gate and its fortified appearance, and the fact that there is a palace where Hamor the king and Shechem the prince lived, and they got Dinah out of there. This is all the symbolism, guys. This is not a coincidence, right? If you go around the world and look at all the heraldry that's out there, the castle, yes, it's found, but it's so heavily concentrated in Iberia, the Iberian Peninsula. And so it was on the flag of Spain for a while. The city of Newcastle, England has it. Puerto Rico, you're going to find it in all the derivatives of Portugal and Spain, all the offshoots, nations, territories that have been influenced by Spain and Portugal. You're going to find the castle. And so we can see, obviously, Simeon and Levi both have a very heavy Latino, Hispanic, Basque, Castellano culture. And, when you look at Castile, that's where you get the Castile soap. Literally, the kingdom of Castile, El Reino de Castilla, literally means the reign of the castle. And that was an 800-year-old kingdom. And that's where you get Castile soap, which is mostly olive oil. That's why it makes it a Castile soap versus different kinds of soap. It's mostly olive oil. There's we get so much of, wine, olive oil. There's so much beautiful stuff about the Iberian Peninsula. There's so much culture that has made its way over here to the U.S. And honestly, the Latino American or Spanish descent population here in the United States continues to grow. And I believe it probably will outpace, and Spanish might even become a majority language if things continue. And because, man, the Spanish people have multiplied greatly. Spanish-speaking descendants of the Kingdom of Spain have multiplied greatly. Here in the U.S., there's Spanish speakers everywhere now, and they can all trace their roots back to both Simeon and Levi, just like I can. I looked at my heraldry, and I have the castle, so that could be Simeon or Levi. So I technically could be a Levite, which is kind of cool because I've always had a passion for teaching the Word, studying the Bible, and so that kind of makes sense. So Levi, when you look at Levi in particular, we don't find the ephod. We don't find the ephod. If you don't know what the ephod is, that's the priestly breastplate. You don't really find that symbol. What you do find, coincidence? Probably not, because again, what I look for, and I told you guys, I look for what I'm trying to figure out. Okay, what is a symbol of the lost tribes? I look for 2 to 3 to 4 symbols on the same crest, on the same coat of arms, to determine a geographical location, to determine a country or a people group that's lost tribes. I look for symbols that are found together. And so, for example, right here on screen, I have Ramos. Ramuz is how it's spelled sometimes, a very ancient medieval Spanish tongue. That has the castle and the gate. But what's interesting about the gate, there's different types of gates in heraldry, guys, okay? Not every gate looks like the one I'm showing you. Look and pay attention to this. It just so happens this is what's called a metal gridiron pattern, and it has 12 squares in it, which is exactly what the ephod would have of the priestly breastplate. 12 gemstones representing the 12 tribes. It just so happens that these gates, in very significant parts of heraldry in the Western nations have the 12 squares as well. You call that coincidence? Probably not. We see it in the House of Lords. That's the logo of the House of Lords right here, of the upper house of Parliament of the United Kingdom. We see the gate, even when the United States was in control of the Panama Canal and they sent the U.S. Army down there for about 10 years, they used this symbol to identify that division of U.S. Army. We see it in London. We see it in Scotland. And of course, you saw it on my screen here. Canada's customs, it has a variation of the gate that actually looks even more like the ephod, because it doesn't really have those prongs, those really sharp metal prongs of the gate, like that, obviously opens up and down. But it doesn't have that. It just has 12 squares. It literally looks just like the ephod. That what you see here, the customs division, of law enforcement and bureaucracy, where they have the, from Toronto to Saskatchewan, they have this symbol, and it's just not coincidence that there's 12 squares. Again, some of them have 16. Some of them have other, numbers of squares, or they have different designs. So this is a very significant symbol, clearly matching the Umim and Turim reference of Deuteronomy 33, clearly referencing the ephod. Clearly, this is the identity of Levi. He's been scattered, but you can find this symbol. These are just some examples, but you find it. It's kind of rare, though. This took me a while to dig these up, but you can find them. All right. So where are the tribes in the last days? Let's keep going through it. So that was the land of Simeon. And then, so like Joshua 20, we'll talk about Levi next time. Let's just go over to Zebulun. And Zebulun is really cool. So for everybody who is Dutch, if you have Dutch descent, I'm going to show you some really cool stuff right here. So Joshua 19:10, the third lot, remember they're casting lots to divide the land, came out for the children of Zebulun, according to their families. And the border of their inheritance was as far as Sarid. Their border went toward the west into Maralah and went to Dabasheth and extended along the brook that is east of Yokneam. Then from Sarid, it went eastward toward the sunrise along the border of Kisloth Tabor and went out toward Daberath, bypassing Yafia. And from there, it passed on the east of Gath Hefer toward Eth Chazin and extended to Rimon, which borders Neah. And then the border went around it on the north side of Hanathon, and it ended in the valley of Yitha El. Included were Katath, Nahalal, Shimron, Idalah, and Bethlehem, right? Beit Lechem, 12 cities and their villages. This was the inheritance of the children of Zebulun according to their families, these cities with their villages. So this is one particular case study. What's really important, guys, to pay attention to the names. And I can't do this for all of them. It's just too much research. But in this particular case, I will show you why some of these names here are so critical. So let's take a look at Zebulun, guys. Again, if you're of Dutch descent, this is going to blow your mind. Because it blew my mind. This stuff always blows my mind, man. If you're excited about this stuff, like I am, this is just so fascinating. I love it. So you see the ship of Zebulun. Why do we see a ship? Well, let's go back real quick to Deuteronomy. Let's take a look at chapter 49, and you'll see that he is going to dwell by the haven of the sea. Genesis 49:13. But here's the interesting thing about this. Again, this is why we have to have the map pulled out. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. Genesis 49:13 tells us that Zebulun would be a seafaring people. But when you look at the map, what do you see? That tribe is landlocked. So what that tells us clearly is that we have to be looking for an end times fulfillment, obviously, like the rest of them. But it wasn't going to be fulfilled from 1300 to 700. How many years is that? 600 years that the tribes are in the land. The north didn't get kicked out for 600 years. It was never fulfilled then. Whoever Zebulun is, that he would be a place of havens for the ships. He would be a maritime tribe. That was never fulfilled in ancient times. So obviously, when we go back to this, we find that Zebulun's logo, his symbol, his crest, is a ship, and we see it in Wales. You see the ship in a lot of places. It kind of looks like this old Israelite kind of boat, or I don't know if you necessarily call it Israelite, but it's just an old style boat. But you see it everywhere in New Zealand, France, Paris, France has the ship of Zebulun. The city of Cambridge in England, the coat of arms of Tunisia, Ireland, Germany, Poland, Belgium. You see Zebulun everywhere. And you might be wondering, well, okay, which one? And I realize I'm in the way. So that's the Tunisia coat of arms. This is where it gets very interesting. Who is this? Who is this that is prophesied here that he's going to dwell by the haven of the sea? And then what does Moses say? I have to look it up in the King James, which I forgot to do. But when you go to the King James version of the Bible, I like how the wording is here, because I think it conveys the original meaning in this case a little bit better. Although I'm not a King James only guy, I like to look at all perspectives, not just one. And this is what it says in the King James version, speaking of Zebulun. Rejoice, Zebulun. This is what Moses says in 33:18 of Deuteronomy. Rejoice in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents. They shall call the people unto the mountain, and there they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hid in the sand. So whoever this is, they're going to suck the sea dry, apparently, somehow. I know it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it will in just a second. That's Zebulun. So Zebulun. There's a book written by a Dutch woman, Helene Kapejan. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right. This book was released in 1984. Strange parallel. Zebulun, the Netherlands, a tribe of Israel. And so what we find in her book, she went through painstaking detail in this book, guys. If you want to learn more about Zebulun being the Dutch, you got to look at this. The original crest of the Dutch Republic has 7 shields. But what's interesting about the crest of the Dutch Republic, just like most lost tribes nations, it's Christian. So there's a Bible. Can you see the Bible on the hull of the ship? You see it, don't you? There's a Bible there. And the crest reads, quiet in the midst of the roaring waves. That's what's in the circle. And then below it, it says, in all pressure and mourning, offer each other the hand. Be faithful in everything. God's church in the fatherland. It's a poem. And so that's Zebulun. And that's the crest of the Dutch Republic. It has a ship. But of course, it makes so much sense that Zebulun would be Holland, Netherlands. Because if you guys know about the Netherlands, here's more evidence, right? The old Fisher seal of the Dutch Republic. The Dutch have always been excellent fishermen, excellent seafarers, exactly what was prophesied in Genesis that was never fulfilled in ancient times. The Dutch, they developed a system of dikes. You guys are probably aware of this, that they developed a systems of dams and dikes to actually dry up most of where they are over there. And I'm actually, so if you want more details on this, you got to check out Bible Prophecy Secrets, guys. There's a link in the description below. So from my book, I write in here, because of the low elevation of the Netherlands, about 2/3 of the country is vulnerable to flooding. But due to the great ingenuity of the Dutch, a system of dikes, dams, canals, and floodgates were constructed to keep various areas of Holland dry for habitation and agriculture. Without these flood control measures in place, many cities would be underwater, including Amsterdam. And so it's actually the Dutch people that successfully sucked the ocean dry so that they could be the most prosperous haven for ships. That's definitely what Netherlands is known for. And they also would reap of the treasures hid in the sand. How beautiful is that, guys? How amazing is that? Let me know in the comments what you think about that. That's pretty amazing stuff. I think it's very noteworthy. Now, when we go back to, remember what I told you, we got to pay attention to the names here. So one of the villages of Zebulun was Nahalal. And what's interesting is that Zebulun never actually drove out the inhabitants of the land. They weren't faithful to do that, like, like a lot of tribes were not faithful to actually kick out the Canaanites. They're all guilty. Nahalal, what we find, and again, this is from that book, Strange Parallel, is that when you look at Nahalel, it means green pastures. And there's in 1647, there was found a temple of a heathen goddess on the island of Wal Cheren at the Schelt. Sorry, guys, if I'm mispronouncing things here, but just bear with me. With the name inscribed in stone, Nehalenia. So how similar is that to that town that we just read, Nehalenia? Immediately after these findings, there were Dutch and English theologians of those days tracing her name back to Nahal, meaning pasture, suggesting she was derived from the Scythian language. So eventually, a town that was part of the inheritance of Zebulun ended up being a pagan goddess, but of Scythian. So Scythian is Hebrew, Hebraic origin. It's another name of the seafarers. So that is just one case study of why it's so important to pay attention to these names that we're reading in Joshua. In fact, you could actually write probably a 500-page book on how these names perhaps manifest in different ways in the history and culture of the tribes in the last days. That's just one example. How interesting is that? So, Issachar. Now this one's going to be a little controversial. Some of you might disagree with me. I definitely can rattle off a list of a couple of guys that would really not like what I'm about to say about Issachar, because they have a bias about who Mystery Babylon is. Some guys think Mystery Babylon is Germany and the EU, and they don't know that what the Bible says about Mystery Babylon the way that we know here on the channel, which, hey, I admit I could be wrong about some things, but it's pretty conclusive. You guys know my thoughts about Mystery Babylon. So I'm going to assign Issachar, in my opinion, with my research, to a specific country that some guys would get really upset about that, and especially the way I'm going to do it. But it's pretty straightforward when we connect the dots with all these tribes, who Issachar is in the last days. Joshua 19:17 says, the fourth lot came out to Issachar. For the children of Issachar, according to their families, and their territory went to Yezreel, including Kesuloth and Shunem, Haphraim, Shihon, Anaharath, Rabit, Kishion, Abez, Remeth, En Ganim, En Hada, and Beit Pazez. And the border reached to Tabor, Shahazimah, and Beit Shemesh. Their border ended at the Jordan, 16 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Issachar, according to their families, the cities and their villages. Issachar is interesting. Let's take a look at him in Genesis 49 and see what was said about him. Now, it's really short and sweet and right to the point. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. That's on screen, isn't it? Good. He saw that rest was good and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden and became a band of donkeys, put to work, enslaved by two burdens, east and west. Now, when you look up the word burden, that's also translated in other places, the underlying Hebrew word, as sheepfold. So we get the understanding of the Hebrew word burden that it's actually referring to nations, countries, districts of people, east and west. He's lying down between two burdens. And from the one direction, which I'm telling you is east, I'm going to show you in a second, and another direction, west, Issachar is loaded down. He became a band of slaves. And so the donkey, so in order to figure out who this was, I actually relied heavily on where we find the donkey in heraldry. It's not very common. It's very uncommon. But you find it in Germany, Switzerland, Poland, Germany, right? You find it in Germany, everywhere in Germany. You also find it in small, what are called communes in France. That doesn't mean they're like tiny little, like you think of like communes with a bunch of hippies. It just means town in French, basically. Although it has a different meaning. But basically towns. You see them in France, the donkey. But what I noticed in my research is that we see Issachar really concentrated in Eastern European countries. This is what I found. And by the way, Rick, appreciate your question. I will definitely address Dan and the book of Revelation when we get to Dan. We're going to get to Dan today. I'll address it briefly. Issachar is the donkey. We find him heavily concentrated in the lands of the east. But one thing you need to know about Issachar is that there's another way to identify him, but it's one that's kind of hidden, but not really. But but there's just so little said about Issachar, honestly, in the scriptures, that we kind of have to like lean a little bit on First Chronicles 12:32. Of the sons of Issachar who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, there's this phrase here. I'm just going to read that. The sons of Issachar were known to have understanding of the times. We go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, and we know that the sun, moon, and stars were put there. The celestial bodies, sun, moon, stars, were put there in order to track the appointed times. That's why God established the celestial bodies. So when we see this, we can understand. And I'm not alone, by the way, but not everybody takes this approach. But I believe that we should be looking for a sun, moon, and stars logo, which I have. And actually, you see it in Switzerland. There's one particular town that had the donkey and 3 stars. And then, you see stars in the Madrid, Spain. You see the stars pretty much in every crest has some kind of star. I mean, not all of them, but you see it in New Zealand, Tunisia. Again, we see the moon and star, which, again, it's very Islamic. Yes, it can be a symbol of Islam, but Islam is an Abrahamic religion. So even when we look at Islamic countries, if there's other identifying symbols, in this case, the scales of justice of Dan, the lion of Judah, and the ship of Zebulun in the coat of arms of Tunisia, well, that makes sense. We should probably be paying attention to that one. That's super lost tribes. Not only that, but one thing you should know, and we'll get to this. We'll get to this more detail when we talk about Dan, because one thing you should know is that Carthage, the kingdom of Carthage, the ancient city of Carthage, was right there in Tunisia, and that was a lost tribes territory through and through. It was a very important Phoenician and lost tribes territory. But yes, we see kind of a eclipsed sun and moon on Milan, or metropolite, a city of Milan, Italy. We see the Democratic Republic of Georgia and Serbia. So we see Issachar again. When we're looking at Georgia, Serbia, we see him in the east, Eastern Europe. We see him in the east. And that's my confirmation. So I've looked at this enough to be like, I think we should be looking at Issachar in the east. And what better personification of this thesis that I'm presenting to you than Nazi Germany? What most people do not understand about Nazi Germany is that it was a Christian nation, right? It was Christian nationalist to an extreme. But Hitler was Christian nationalist but also Aryan, and there's some demonic stuff. I get it. The swastika is actually an ancient symbol of the sun that traces its roots back to ancient Sumeria. It is an ancient symbol. The Hindus used it. So many different cultures used it. It's not just a symbol of what people associate it with now, because it's been so overplayed in Hollywood. Now, I'm not advocating for identification with this symbol. Let's just be clear. But you have to look at it for what it actually is. It's an ancient symbol of the sun. And it's rotating, basically, is how the symbol would be portrayed. A rotating sun. This technically could be viewed as a symbol of the black sun, but I'm not going to get into too much of lore. There's a lot to this one, but it's a symbol of the sun. Okay, that fits our description for sun, moon, and stars. They had understanding of the times. First Chronicles 12:32. Issachar is a strong donkey lying between 2 powers, east and west. Well, hasn't Russia always been at odds with the French Empire, right? The NATO alliance? Russia has always been at war with the Ukrainian region and all those countries. And so what we see with literally Germany, which I believe, if we're going to say it's one nation, it's not one nation, Issachar. I believe Issachar is a little scattered in all of Eastern Europe, but man, the Berlin Wall is the perfect example of two burdens, East and West, dividing the capital city. And how important is that when we're considering the identity of what Issachar, because Issachar was a strong donkey. The military machine of Nazi Germany and their ingenuity and their highway system and their technology was so advanced. They were a very powerful people, a strong donkey, but they had to actually become a band of slaves to the West and to the East. And literally, Berlin is like the ultimate personification of this because it happened. It happened in recent history, which fulfills the last days prophecy of who Issachar is, that strong donkey. And so the Berlin Wall was around from 1961 to 1989, separating East and West Berlin. You guys know the story. On the East, you had communist Soviet Russia. On the West, you had the quote unquote free West. They put the wall up because so many people were fleeing the control and domination of Russia, Soviet communism, and they put the wall up to prevent people from leaving the tyranny of communism. Of course, everything was eventually disbanded. The USSR fell apart. At least that's the narrative. And then Germany was restored. But who's telling Germany what to do these days, right? The West. And they're constantly caught in the middle. Ukraine. And so all of Eastern Europe is constantly caught in the crosshairs of NATO versus Russia. And so I believe Issachar is Eastern Europe. What do you guys think? Pretty mind-blowing. Germany and onward. I believe that those regions, that's where you're going to find Issachar. I think that's the fulfillment we're looking for. Pretty interesting, right? I don't know if you've thought about these things before. I did write about these things in Bible Prophecy Secrets. And you can get more details in there. Let's talk about Asher. Pretty straightforward. Asher's blessing is really straightforward. We have to look at both Moses and Jacob for the fullness of what's being said here about Asher. Yeah. They're still strong. I agree with that. Iron Clay. Appreciate you guys being here, hanging out. And yeah, cool. The message of the godly DNA. We'll talk more about Dan and stuff. Appreciate you, Sister Stacy. God bless you. I'm just checking comments real quick, guys. Yeah, we'll talk about so Dan actually has 4 symbols. The eagle is absolutely one of them, 100%. Okay. Asher. You guys are going to be surprised where Asher is. Asher. The bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Genesis 49:20. That's what Jacob blessed him with. And then Moses said in Deuteronomy 33:24, and of Asher, he said, Asher is most blessed of sons. Let him be favored by his brothers. Let him dip his foot in oil. And he says here, your sandals shall be iron and bronze as your days, so shall your strength be. And then he talks about all of Israel being Yeshurun, the upright one. But let's just pause here. So there's a reference to being blessed, dipping his foot in oil, iron, bronze, and then when we go back, once again, royal dainties. This is so key. So you might be wondering, why do I have these symbols here? Where did you get this from that? They didn't say anything about a cup. Maybe I can see the olive tree, but where did you get the cup, right? So the cup is not just an ordinary cup. You might be actually, depending on your reaction to that symbol, you might be thinking, oh, that's the Holy Grail. Which the Holy Grail is like the lore behind the cup of the Last Supper. And, that people think the Holy Grail was the cup of the Last Supper was golden and it was hidden somewhere. And it's a unique treasure. That's what the Holy Grail is the same cup that Jesus drank from before he died. But chalice, let's just talk about what a chalice is, and I'll go back and explain why this indeed is a symbol that we can assign to Asher. The chalice is a drinking cup raised on the stem with the foot or base, but this is something that is identified with royalty. This is a symbol, and what chalices were used for, or goblets is another word for it. That's the French terminology. They were used throughout history as important pieces of in churches, important gifts for royalty. So if somebody wanted to give a king an important gift, they would make a chalice as a token of appreciation, of honor, of respect. Chalices have been used in this manner to represent royalty. And so we can say, okay, the royal dainties, that he's mining the iron and precious metals. That's what Asher's up to. So clearly, when we combine all the aspects of the blessing, we can see that the chalice, the goblet, made out of a precious thing that's associated with royalty, this makes a lot of sense to assign to Asher. And when we look for this symbol, we find that the chalice, the royal cup, is a symbol that you find in the kingdom of Galicia, I believe how it's pronounced, in the Iberian Peninsula for almost 1,000 years. You have this important symbol for this kingdom of Galicia. And let me just go back and show you which kingdom that is. Hopefully you can see it on screen. In the very northwest tip of the Iberian Peninsula, you see that symbol of, or that's where the symbol lived. So Asher is actually very of Spanish descent, actually. And this makes sense. We're going to talk about the olives because obviously Spain is an olive oil producing country. When you look at Asher, this is fascinating that you see the chalice and the royal arms of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. And so you might be wondering, well, that doesn't look like a chalice. Yeah, I consider the silhouette a chalice there, and that shows up in the some of the Nordic countries. Then you see Germany, again, Spain, the city of Cuenca, I believe how you say it. Germany. We see this cup, we see this chalice. I think it's very important. And so let me just read the lot. The fifth lot came out for the tribe of children of Asher according to their families, and their territory included Helkath, Hali, Beten, Akshaph, Alamelech, Hamad, and Mishal, and it reached to Mount Carmel westward along the brook Shihor Libnath. And it turned toward the sunrise to Beit Dagon, and it reached toward Zebulun, the valley of Yipthael, then northward beyond Beit Emek and Neiel, bypassing Kabul, which is on the left, including Hebron, Rehob, Rahamon, Cana, as far as Greater Sidon. And the border turned to Ramah and to the fortified city of Tyre. And then the border turned to Hosa and ended at the sea by the region of Akzib. Also, Ummah, Afek, and Rehob were included, 22 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Asher, according to their families, these cities with their villages. So what we find with Asher, they never quite took the territory, right? The Canaanites dwelt in Tyre and Sidon. Those were very Canaanite cities. But Asher was right there on the coast, and those are top oil producing olive oil. To this day, Lebanon, so that's modern day Lebanon. To this day, Lebanon is known for its olive oil. And so that is why we assign, again, he dipped his foot in oil. It refers to oil production even in ancient times, but again, it's a last days prophecy as well, right? So we're looking for olive oil producing countries in the last days. So that is why when we look for an olive tree like we should be, you find Spain. For sure you find Spain. You find Morocco. You find Portugal, Italy. These regions all have olives, olive oil. You find it. It's a rare symbol, by the way. Not that it's rare. It's just not like a primary, like this is a just in your face symbol. You kind of have to look for it. You really have to dig for it. But you find like in Partaloa, Spain, you find the Wolf of Benjamin with the olive tree. It looks like a lion. You see confirmations that these are lost tribe Israelite places like Morocco, for sure, because again, that is exactly the regions where Asher would have been hanging out. Because again, he was a coastal tribe, a seafarer, and what we know when we study ancient history, the Phoenicians, which again, the Phoenicians are just those people of Canaan living in Tyre and Sidon, right there where Asher's territory was. They were big time seafarers and they would travel all over the Mediterranean. Well, guess what? North Africa, you're going to find, that's why we find so many crests, Israelite crests in North Africa, from, like I said, Carthage to Morocco. You're going to find all these. And of course, the Iberian Peninsula, Italy, you're going to find the olives. You're going to find Asherites. what you should also know is that their expeditions didn't end. Remember what Moses said, you guys are going to be mining precious metal. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the reason why Rome was so imperialistic and wanted to take over the British Isles is because the British Isles have historically been known for tin, iron, lead, and precious metals. And so the Asherites were going also to the UK, what we know as the UK. So you're going to find Asherites, you're going to find symbols of Asher. In the UK, you're not going to find the olive tree, though. That's limited to the Mediterranean. But you get my point here that the chalice, the royal cup, that's why we see Asher, of course, in Germany. In the British Isles, you will find it. It takes time, but you will find it. You will find the symbols of Asher. Asher was mining the precious stuff of the earth. That was his blessing. That's who Asher is. And hopefully that's been eye-opening for you to see some of the patterns here of Scripture as we identify these lost tribes, nations in the last days, these territories. Naphtali, Joshua 19:32, the sixth lot came out for the children of Naphtali, according to their families. And the border began at Halef, enclosing the territory from the terebinth tree and Zananim, Adami, Nekeb, and Jabniel, as far as Lakum, and it ended at the Jordan. From Halef, the border extended westward to Aznath Tabor, and went out from there toward Hukok. It adjoined Zebulun on the south side and Asher on the west side. It ended at Judah by the Jordan toward the sunrise. And the fortified cities are Zidim, Zer, Hamath, Rakath, Kinnereth, Adamah, Ramah, Hazor, Kadesh, Edrei, and Hazor, Iron, or Iron, probably as I pronounce it, Migdol El, Horem, Beit Anath, and Beit Shemesh, 19 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the children of Naphtali, according to their families. The cities and their villages. So let's take a quick look at the blessing. Naphtali is a deer let loose, is what Jacob said. A deer let loose. Sadly, what people think is that has to do with sexual promiscuity. No, guys. Use the three laws of interpretation: law of first mention, law of definitions, and law of context. When you faithfully look at what the deer is, it's a female. So it'd be a hind, not a stag, not a male deer, a female. Let loose. Is that referring to promiscuity and the fact that deer multiply greatly? Or is it referring to something else? He uses beautiful words. And when you understand the blessing there, guys, it's really clear who Naphtali is. In my view, it's pretty straightforward. Now, let's just take a look at his territory. Naphtali is right there next to Asher, like it said, Zebulun. And so Naphtali, a deer let loose, what could that be in the last days? Well, let's look for the symbol. Let's look for the hind, the female deer, and it'll make a lot of sense. Germany, of course. It seems like all lost tribes are in Germany. Then we have Poland, Finland. We have Sweden, Serbia, but we see Ireland as well. We see Naphtali in the far north, in the northern region. Now, what I present in Bible Prophecy Secrets, guys, is that what you see here, what you see with Naphtali is that there's a particular place that has the fulfillment of Genesis 49:21, both the hind let loose, the deer let loose, but using beautiful words. And that is, in my opinion, it's Sweden. I believe, well, not just Sweden, but all Scandinavia, kind of like Benjamin's in Scandinavia. I believe that Naphtali is in Sweden. And why do I say that? Well, the beautiful words portion of the blessing, clearly, I mean, in the last days, why wouldn't it be referring to the Nobel Prizes? Since 1901, Sweden is the nation that's been issuing the annual Nobel Prizes, or Nobel Prizes, hopefully I didn't mumble that too much, to commemorate special achievements worldwide. They're gold-plated medals that are considered the most prestigious awards in the world for each of 6 major categories. And so what happens at the Nobel Prize events is that there's the exchange of beautiful words, right? Oh, good job for this, here's the Nobel Prize for economics or history or science. I believe there's one for science. I forget, off the top of my head. You have Nobel Prizes being awarded, but okay, the hind let loose. A lot of guys will say that that's a reference to sexual promiscuity. I think that's a very poor mishandling of the Bible. Because what you do is when you look at where you look at the symbols, you look at where the Bible uses the word deer, and you find it in the Song of Solomon, you find it in the Psalms, you find the deer used very specifically to talk about the beauty of maternal instinct, motherhood, and the caring and nurturing of children. And it just so happens that in the Nordic countries, there was a study released by UNESCO, or UNICEF, sorry, that found that the Nordic countries of Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and Estonia all ranked the highest for family-friendly policies in OECD and EU countries. So in Sweden in particular, the 1974 Parental Leave Act introduced 180 days of state-funded paternal leave from work responsibilities, which could be shared between father and mother as they see fit. However, this law has since been upgraded, and up to 18 months of leave are allowed, with parents receiving 80% of their salary during paternal leave. So if you have a child, you can actually excuse yourself from work, be compensated, and you can actually nurture and train up your children. And again, according to the UN, the Nordic countries have the most family-friendly policies that allow for a hind, a deer, a female, to be let loose, to be blessed, to have children, and not have to decide between a career and motherhood. Now, as I said that, you're probably like, man, yeah, that's kind of different. The United States isn't like that. I mean, yes, you can work things out, but in other countries, the cultural expectation is that, yeah, get back to work. You got your C-section, now get back to work, right? Right? I mean, this is how it works in Western countries for the most part, but the exception is obviously those Nordic countries. So that is what we see from Naphtali. When you properly look at the female deer, guys, you can't just be like, oh, it's sexual promiscuity. I think way too many guys have made that mistake when they're doing the Lost Tribes commentary and analysis. I've read tons of books on this, and they usually say that. And I'm like, what are you doing? Maternal instinct, motherhood, guys. It's a beautiful thing. Let's celebrate it. I think they're doing a really cool job over there in the Nordic countries. You might not like, the socialist type of policies and stuff like that. I get it, but I think they're doing something right with that blessing. All right. Dan, you guys have been asking me about Dan. Let's talk about Dan. The seventh lot came out for the tribe of the children of Dan, according to their families, and the territory of their inheritance was Zorah, Eshtaol, Ir, Shemesh, Sha'alabin. I sound Muslim, don't I? Sha'alabin. Ailon, Yethla, Elon, Timnah, Ekron, Elteke, Gibbethon, Baalath, Yehud, Bene Barak, Gat Rimon, Meyarkon, and Rakon, with a region near Joppa, or Joppa as we anglicize it. And the border of the children of Dan went beyond these, because the children of Dan went up to fight against Leshem and took it. And they struck it with the edge of the sword, took possession of it, and dwelt in it. They called Leshem Dan, after the name of Dan, their father. Pay attention to that, because it's exactly what we see throughout history. It's so cool that it's recorded here in Joshua, because this is exactly what we see throughout all of where Dan ended up going. This is the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Dan, according to their families, these cities with their villages. I'll just read Joshua's inheritance real quick, and then we'll uncover who Dan is. Joshua 19:49, when they had made an end of dividing the land as an inheritance according to their borders, the children of Israel gave an inheritance among them to Yehoshua, son of Nun. According to the word of the Lord Jehovah, they gave him a city, which he asked for, Timnath Serah, in the mountains of Ephraim, because Joshua was an Ephraimite, which is really cool when you think about Moses being a Levite. He was a southerner, and Joshua being a northerner. It's just something to think about. There's some symbolism there. And he built the city and dwelt in it. These were the inheritance which Eleazar the priest, Yehoshua son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel divided as an inheritance by lot in Shiloh, where the tabernacle, remember the tabernacle was? And before Yehovah, at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, so they made an end of dividing the country. What's interesting is, even though they divided it up, it doesn't mean that they actually conquered it. Remember, they weren't faithful to actually drive out the inhabitants. They made covenants with them. They ended up becoming paganized in their religious observance. They ended up becoming compromised, and they eventually got kicked out. But, you got to give the Israelites some credit here. 600 years is a pretty good amount of time. They at least dwelt in the land, and there was God-fearing people there. I showed you guys how there was a civil war that happened because Benjamin became corrupted by the Gibeonites. That's my assumption, but it has biblical evidence to support it that the Gibeonites were the ones that corrupted the Benjamites. And so the people were righteous for a time. And let's talk about Dan, shall we? Let's take a look at his territory real quick. Dan, where is he? Yes, he's right here. He has Joppa. That's modern day Tel Aviv. So the modern day capital of Israel, which is Tel Aviv the capital? Sure, but Jerusalem is really the capital. Everybody knows that Jerusalem's the true capital of Israel. But even in modern day 1948 modern Zionist Israel, Tel Aviv is actually the property of Dan. Just throwing that out there. That's also where Jonah went to go flee from the presence of the Lord. Went to Tarshish. He tried anyway. Joppa, that's the port city. So Dan obviously is going to be a seafarer. This is extremely important that he's a seafarer because in Judges chapter 5, I'm just going to start. I know it's kind of a weird place to start. Judges 5:17, it said that Deborah speaking, why did Dan remain on ships? Asher continued at the seashore, stayed by his inlets. Dan remained on ships as early as 1200 BC. He just couldn't get off the ships, is what we're being told in Judges chapter 5, verse 17. Well, let's take a look at Genesis 49:16. We'll bounce that off. This, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel, because obviously Dan means judge. Daniel means God is my judge. Dan means to judge or judging, right? Dan, the judge, shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent. That's the first symbol. Well, second. The first one's the judge, the scales of justice. The other one is the serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider shall fall backwards. So we should be looking for a horse on its heels. And then it says, I have waited for your salvation, O Yehovah. It's kind of interjected there as part of Dan's blessing, which I admit I don't totally understand, but let's just look at what we can understand. Dan said, or Moses said about Dan, that he is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. That I don't totally get because the lion is ascribed to Judah, but hey, maybe we should be looking for some type of symbolism that mixes the lion and Dan's symbols. I'm going to show you actually that. I'm speaking rhetorically. I found some symbols that where we combine the lion and the eagle. So why am I saying eagle? I just want to refresh your memory of what we talked about last time. When you look at the encampment of the children of Israel, north, south, east, west, Dan was the eagle in the north. We make the connection of Numbers chapters 1 and 2 to Ezekiel chapter 10. The cherubim have the four faces. Israelite was camped with the four faces, basically, of the cherubim. North, south, east, west. Dan is in the north. Dan is the eagle. 100%. We can verify that from the scriptures. Wherever Dan went, guys, look at what he did. He conquered. And he would name everything after his father, the patriarch of Dan. The Dardanelles, Danea, Danube River, Danzig, Danmark, literally means Dan's mark. Dan is everywhere. The legends of Dan are everywhere as the seafaring people. And where you find the eagle of Dan, you're going to find it everywhere, right? Of course. Why wouldn't we? You see it in Poland, the Czech Republic, the first French Empire, where France reached its peak of power under Napoleon Bonaparte, 1804 to 1815. That was an eagle of Dan. That was the symbol that unified the French Empire under Napoleon. Then you see again, I showed you guys this last time, the royal standard of the Catholic monarchs of Spain, which has different variations. Here's one of them. It has an eagle. Germany, Austria, Latvia. So remember I told you we should be looking for something that mixes the lion with the eagle? That's perfect. There's a perfect example of that. This creature has the beak of an eagle, a wing of an eagle, but the body of a lion. And that's exactly what we were told about Dan. So Latvia clearly has Danitic influence, Danish influence, right? Danish influence. Now, what's so interesting is that the reason we look at Europe so strongly is because they colonized all of the West, the Western Hemisphere. We look at France, we look at the Spanish monarchy, the Spanish Empire. Well, okay, the coat of arms of Mexico has the eagle of Dan and the serpent. that what an infusion of two of his symbols. We'll talk about the serpent in just a moment. But then, of course, the Great Seal of the United States has the Dan eagle as well. So Dan, he's the eagle, but he's also, like I said, the serpent. And sometimes you see the serpent mixed with other Israelite symbols as well, whether it's the town of Aalsmeer in the Netherlands, where you see a lion holding a black snake. Might be difficult to see because the contrast is not good on that crest. Hopefully you can see it. Then you have the Republic of Senarica in Italy. That's a 400-year republic, and it has the lion with the snake as well, which is two symbols of Dan, the lion and the eagle, right? How cool is that? But we also see what's called a mythological creature, a wyvern. A wyvern. We kind of see it in the Welsh dragon, the flag of Wales. Technically speaking, that is a dragon and not a wyvern, but you can clearly see the resemblance of a true wyvern, which has 2 legs, versus a dragon, which has 4 legs. They're basically the same symbol. And so the term wyvern originated around 1600, derived from wyver from 1300, and is ultimately from the Latin word vipera, meaning, or vipera, meaning viper. So the wyvern literally means viper in Latin. Come on, guys, you can't make this up. So what did we learn about Dan? He is a viper. He is a viper. Now, why did it describe it that way? What makes him a viper? I think I've already shown this to you. Let me just emphasize it. Wherever Dan went, he traveled in a snake-like fashion on ships. He was always on ships, and he was going and colonizing and naming everything after the father, Dan, the patriarch. And so he was like a serpent and making the horse, the rider, fall backwards because of his many conquests. And he was always on the ships, allied with the Phoenicians, doing seafaring, trading. He was the sea peoples. There's so many legends in Greek lore that Dan, the Danish people, the Dan Noah, there's so many names for Dan in all of literature. I'm not going to get into it too heavily, guys, but there's so much about Dan everywhere when you know what you're looking for. What we see here with the horse, what I looked for when I was putting this together for you guys, you have to look for the horse that's on its hind legs, right? Because there's different symbols where it's like a horse leaping confidently. No, we're looking for a horse that's a little scared. And so we see that in Germany, Stuttgart. We see it in Germany again, Lower Saxony, England. Again in Germany, again in England, we see the horse on its hind legs with the wyvern. So obviously the borough of Bromley, England, has a confirmation there of Dan. But we see, so obviously there's so many symbols, right? One of them that I liked was Pennsylvania, which used to be the capital of the United States. The original capital was in Philadelphia for a time. And what do we see? We see the eagle of Dan, and we see a horse on its hind legs. So to me, right, that's pretty interesting. That obviously we should be looking for, obviously, there's Danish lost tribes in America, just like there's a ton of lost tribes in America. But I love to see the confirmation in the heraldry. And the final one is the scales of justice. Dan is a judge. Dan is a judge. He will judge his people. And we see that the scales of justice is the symbol. Again, Tunisia being very important. Why? Because when we look at Carthage, you look at the Phoenician trade routes, which I've already shown you. Let me just refresh your brain. You see that Dan, which is exactly right here, he would be traveling with the Phoenicians and going all over the Mediterranean. He could not get off the ships. And so obviously Carthage being right here in Tunisia, yeah, Dan is going to be very present there. And that's why we see many confirmations of that in this crest with the ship of Zebulun, the scales of Dan, and the lion of Judah, of course. But it also could be the lion of Dan. And so obviously we see the Danish influence there of the ancient people, the lost tribes. We see the Republic of Somaliland, which is not to be confused with Somalia, but the Horn of Africa. We see the scales of justice with the eagle of Dan. That's very significant. Obviously, Dan made his way all the way to the tip of Africa. We see Switzerland, France, Germany. We see, what I love is the flag of Ethiopia. And the flag of Ethiopia from 1992 to 1996 had the scales of justice and a winged bird. It's not an eagle. It's too fat, but it's a winged bird. I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but You have the scales of justice. What's cool about Ethiopia, guys, let me pull this up. I don't have it pulled up right off the top, but I can get it in like a few seconds here. What I love about Ethiopia, when you look at the New Testament, obviously we know there's an Ethiopian eunuch that converts to Christ. Before the New Testament, we know that Ethiopia obviously had marriages, interrelations with Solomon. There was obviously descendants of Solomon, Haile Selassie, and the Solomon dynasty going down there to Ethiopia. So clearly Ethiopia is important. You see the line of Judah in Ethiopia. And it's so interesting that it's so similar to, in my view, to the line of Persia, of Iran. That's the state flag that they had before the Muslim flag that they have now with the name of Allah on it. But so we see the line of Judah in Iran, or it could be the line of Dan, but most likely the line of Judah in Iran. But I think it's interesting that Ethiopia had scales of justice and a line of Judah, a line of Dan. So it could be a line of Dan or a line of Judah. When we see the scales, though, it kind of makes me think there might be some Danish there as well. Well, of course, Ethiopia is known to have descendants of Judah. So that's kind of a wrap on that, guys. What do you think? Covered a lot. This took me so long, man. This took me so long to get these images, these crests, man. I was sifting through these things. It took me a good old time. It took me a good old time to figure this out, man. To get all these images. There's just so much research. I'm barely scratching the surface. There's so much scholarly research and so many other things I wanted to include in this presentation. I'll be doing a separate video soon about Dan, about the Lost Tribes in a more condensed fashion, where I summarize everything we talked about in the live stream in just a few minutes to really give it a nice presentation with everything that we've talked about, including some of the things I kind of maybe messed up on a little bit here or there. I want to make it another video just with all the tribes in one video. It'd be shorter. And hopefully you guys have learned a lot, though, from the deep dive. This is more of a deep dive where we're looking at all the scriptures as best we can, and we're identifying where these tribes went. And it is a massive field of research. In fact, heraldry, you could dedicate your life to heraldry, like W.H. Bennett. I consulted his work on the crests and the heraldry and the tribes of Israel. W.H. Bennett, there's men that have dedicated their lives to this topic. There's so much here. But hopefully I've given you guys an excellent framework, an excellent foundation to see the scattering and to see what are the fulfillments of these prophecies in the last days. Now, people ask me all the time, why is Dan not mentioned in the book of Revelation? And it is true. Dan is not mentioned. There are 144,000 Israelites that are mentioned in the book of Revelation, 12,000 from 12 tribes. The problem is, right? Not a problem. It's just the way it is. Joseph is counted twice, and so it appears that all the tribes are numbered properly, but because we have Joseph twice, Dan is actually missing. So what happened there? This is a place of speculation that I haven't spent too much time on, because clearly it's important, but not that important, because we see in Ezekiel chapter 40 and onward, we see the New Jerusalem. We see that there's going to be 12 gates for the 12 tribes, and Dan is mentioned. And in fact, Dan is given an allotment in the New Jerusalem. So Dan is not lost. He's not done away with. He's going to come back. But as for the fact that he's not mentioned in the book of Revelation with the 144,000, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. And so when I don't know what to do with something, especially in the esoteric, allegorical, metaphorical book of Revelation, I lean on what we can know to determine maybe what could be. So look at the crests, look at where Dan has been, look at the serpent's trail, and find out where he's been. And perhaps we should expect something to happen to the Danish people. Maybe something's going on with Dan in the last days. Then there's a reason why he's not mentioned in the book of Revelation, but he's coming back anyway. So I don't know what to do with it, guys. If you have something a little bit more substantial for me, shoot me an email, drop a comment. Let me know what you have discovered. But for some reason, I don't think it's worth spending too much time on right now. I think there's other important things to focus on. And for sure, it is a mystery, and it'd be really cool to dig into it. I geek out on the stuff that we can kind of be more certain about, which is the crests, the migration patterns, archaeology, history, oral tradition, and all these types of things. So again, I'm your brother Abraham, guys. Thank you for being here on short notice. I appreciate every single one of you guys. If you could like, share this video, help this channel to grow and help us to reach the tribes, right? God's people with the message of, hey, did you know that you might be a lost tribe, or at least the nation that you're living in identifies with this tribe or this tribe? People need to know these things because we're not just a bunch of random pagan Gentiles. Most Westerners are not. We're not just a bunch of random pagan Gentiles, but we have prophetic end times identities that once we see where our ancestors have been, then we can more clearly understand and discern where we're going. So, God bless you guys. Thank you so much. Geekiness. Peggy, Stacy, thank you for being here. Shalom to you guys. Be blessed. And I'll catch you very soon. Overcoming Babylon every single week, guys. I got some stuff to do right now in the Denver Metro. And I appreciate your prayers, support, and love. Thank you guys for the amazing feedback on this one. This one, seriously, I even spent a little money on getting some of the images from copyrighted websites to put on the slides for you today. So anyway, it's a lot of work, man. It's a lot of work. God bless you guys. I'll catch